The soft overhead lights in the first-class cabin bathed everything in a muted gold. Leather seats gleaming, tray tables polished to a sheen, passengers quietly scrolling through phones or sipping wine. Flight 214 of Horizon Air was boarding smoothly, like clockwork. A calm procession of suits and silk scarves, murmured greetings and business-class rituals. And then he appeared, a boy, no, not quite a boy, not yet a man. Malik Reed, 17, dressed in a dark hoodie, clean white sneakers, and worn jeans that hung just right. Around his neck, a pair of sleek, noise-canceling headphones rested like a silent crown. And in his hand, a simple black phone, screen dimmed. No luggage but a single leather backpack aged at the corners. His steps were soft, practiced. He moved with the grace of someone who didn't want to be noticed, in the quiet confidence of someone who expected to be. Malik glanced at the overhead bin, placed his bag inside with care, and slid into seat 2A, next to the window. That was always his preference. Window seat, left side, front row. He didn't need to see the rest of the cabin. He had long since learned that most of what he needed to watch was already behind him. He opened a book, hardcover, pages worn, spine soft, and tilted slightly into the corner, reading quietly as passengers trickled in. A few people glanced at him, most didn't, but one woman in a navy pantsuit lingered in her gaze, then looked away as if she had seen something and decided it wasn't hers to notice. That was fine with Malik. He was used to being seen and then dismissed. He preferred it. He was halfway down the page when the sound of heels broke the rhythm of the boarding announcements. Sandra Beckett, late 40s, strode down the aisle like she owned the sky. Her uniform was pressed sharp, lipstick matte, hair pinned so tightly not a strand dared move. The kind of woman who didn't just follow airline protocol. She wrote it in her mind. Sandra paused every few rows, nodding with a mechanical grace. Welcome aboard. Good afternoon, SCEM. Thank you for flying with Horizon. And then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. There he was, the boy in 2A. Malik didn't notice her at first. He was still reading, shoulders relaxed. But Sandra noticed everything. The hoodie, the sneakers, the fact that he hadn't made eye contact. Her brows dipped ever so slightly. She stepped closer. Excuse me, she said, her voice louder than necessary, crisp enough to cut butter. A few heads turned. Malik looked up slowly, politely. Yes, ma'am? Sandra folded her arms. Are you sure you're supposed to be in this seat? Malik blinked, then nodded once. Yes. I'll need to see your boarding pass, please. The word please landed flat, more command than courtesy. Without hesitation, Malik reached into his hoodie pocket and handed over his ticket. Sandra took it, not received, not accepted, but took, and studied it like she expected it to be fake. Her lips tightened. This is a first-class ticket. I know, Malik said softly. Sandra's gaze darted from the ticket to his face. Are you flying alone? Yes. No one else booked under your name? A parent? Guardian? Malik didn't answer this time. He just looked at her. There was a pause, brief, heavy. Then her tone shifted. There's been a mistake. You need to move to the back of the plane. This is my seat, Malik replied, calm but firm. Sandra leaned in slightly, her expression hardening. I don't know how you got this ticket, but I'm not about to argue. Please move to the economy now, or I will have security escort you. When he didn't move immediately, she reached for his phone, sitting on the armrest, and in the process, her hand struck his. A sharp slap, loud enough that a nearby passenger audibly gasped. The cabin quieted. Someone shifted in their seat, but no one spoke. Malik froze, not from pain, but from something colder, familiar. The kind of moment that didn't shock you, only reminded you. He stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his backpack, pulled his hood forward slightly, and walked the aisle, past the business coats, the pursed lips, the carefully averted eyes, past the silence, to the back of the plane. He took a narrow, creaky seat near the restrooms. A broken armrest jabbed at his ribs. He didn't care. He pulled out his phone and typed one sentence. She slapped my hand, kicked me to the back. He hit send, then looked out the window. Nothing had changed outside, but inside that plane, something had just begun. At 38,000 feet above sea level, nothing looked urgent. The sky remained a smooth blue canvas, undisturbed and unbothered. But back on the ground in a glass-clad tower on the 42nd floor of Horizon Air's headquarters, a private phone buzzed quietly atop a marble desk. Charles Reed, CEO of Horizon Air, didn't look at it immediately. He rarely did. Most messages filtered through 3 layers of assistance before they reached his eyes. But this one came through a direct line. Only 3 people in the world had access to it. He glanced at the screen, brow furrowing. Malik, only 2 lines. She slapped my hand, kicked me to the back. Charles didn't breathe for a full second, not because he was surprised, but because he wasn't. He stood slowly, crossed to the office phone, and pressed a button with practice control. The line connected to Executive Ops, the central artery of Horizon Air's command infrastructure. A calm voice answered. "Yes, Mr. Reed?" "Flight 214, Charles said. "Pause it, now." The voice didn't hesitate. "Understood." Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't pace. He just returned to his chair, laced his fingers together, and stared out the window toward the sky, where his son now sat, not in first class, but in a seat that never belonged to him. Not because Malik couldn't afford it, but because someone decided he didn't belong. Back on board Flight 214, the energy had shifted. The boarding door remained open. The engines were silent, yet the passengers could feel something in the air, a tension they couldn't name but wouldn't ignore. Some looked toward the cockpit, others whispered. A few glanced down the aisle toward the last row, where Malik Reed sat in silence, head leaning against the window, face unreadable. He didn't move. He had already done what needed to be done. In the galley, Sandra Beckett sipped her coffee with a kind of smug resolve. "I handled it," she muttered under her breath. "That boy was a disruption." Lana Rivers, the younger flight attendant, hesitated nearby. Her name tag was slightly crooked, her hands nervously adjusting cups on a tray that didn't need arranging. "Was there an issue with his ticket?" Lana asked, voice low. Sandra scoffed. "You saw him, Lana. Does that look like someone flying solo in first class?" Lana didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward the front, then toward the back of the plane. Her silence said more than any disagreement could. Then the intercom came to life. "Flight attendant Sandra Beckett, please report to the cockpit." The coffee cup froze halfway to Sandra's lips. "That's odd," Lana said. Sandra straightened her uniform, smoothed her bun, and walked briskly up the aisle. Some passengers tracked her with their eyes, curious, uncertain. Her pace slowed slightly as she reached the cockpit, where the door was already open. The captain didn't smile. He simply said, "Close the door." Sandra obeyed. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was clinical, cold, and uncontrollable. The captain stood beside the comms panel. On the screen beside him, a face appeared, firm-jawed, suited, and familiar to anyone who ever read Skyline magazine. David Langston, Director of Flight Operations. "Ms. Beckett," he said, "we received a call from Executive Command regarding a passenger in Seat 2A, a Mr. Malik Reed." Sandra blinked. "Yes, sir. There was a seating error. I corrected it." "Did you check the manifest?" Langston asked, eyes narrowing. No, not directly. He wasn't on the internal list I had." "You assumed then." Langston's voice turned colder. Do you know who Malik Reed is? Sandra shifted, visibly uncomfortable. He's just a teenager. I didn't. He's the son of Charles Reed, the captain said, cutting her off. Founder and CEO of this airline. Sandra's blood drained from her face. We've received executive orders, Langston continued. This aircraft is to remain grounded until the incident is addressed. You are to escort Mr. Reed back to his seat, apologize in front of the entire cabin, and return here for further instructions. Sandra's voice cracked. In front of everyone. Yes, the captain said sharply. You humiliated the wrong person, Ms. Beckett. Now you will make it right, or you will never wear this uniform again. The cockpit door clicked open. As Sandra stepped out, the plane felt different. All eyes were on her now, not with admiration, but with anticipation. Some passengers whispered. Others held up phones, recording discreetly. A few merely watched with arms folded, waiting to see how this played out. She walked down the aisle, every step heavier than the last. At the back, Malik still sat silently, watching the clouds drift beyond the glass. Sandra stopped in front of him and swallowed hard. Mr. Reed, she said, forcing a calm tone, there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat. Malik didn't respond right away. He let her words hang there, brittle, hollow. Then quietly he stood, not because she asked, but because he was done letting people pretend they were in control. The aisle felt longer than it ever had before. Sandra Beckett, once the polished enforcer of first-class order, now walked at half her usual pace, shadowed by something far heavier than the neat rows of stairs that followed her. Malik Reed walked beside her, his steps calm, even, measured. He didn't puff his chest or look around for validation. He simply walked like someone who knew exactly where he was supposed to be and refused to let anyone forget it again. Whispers rose gently from the passengers they passed. That's the kid she kicked out. She's walking him back now. Did you see the slap? Some phones discreetly filmed, others typed silently, thumbs dancing across screens, feeding a story that had already begun to bloom across the internet. Malik noticed. He just didn't care. Let them record. Let them see. When they reached seat 2A, Sandra gestured stiffly. This is your seat, she said. He nodded once and sat down, not with defiance, not with triumph, just with clarity. He was reclaiming something that had been his all along, a place he never should have been asked to abandon. Sandra lingered beside him, searching for the right words, something rehearsed, something that might save what was left of her reputation. But the words wouldn't come. Not now, not when every eye in the cabin pierced through her polished exterior and saw what lay beneath. Assumption, pride, and the fallout of unchecked bias. If there's anything else you need, she murmured, voice brittle, please let me know. Malik didn't answer. He turned to the window instead. She stood frozen for a beat too long, then turned and walked back down the aisle. Not a single passenger smiled at her this time. Not one offered a courteous nod. Instead, they watched her retreat like she had become the turbulence. No longer in control of the cabin, no longer a steward of comfort. When she reached the galley, Lana Rivers was waiting. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. She had seen, and she had stayed quiet. Sandra picked up a tray, began rearranging cups again, this time her hands unsteady. Across the cabin, the silence was telling. The same passengers who once ignored Malik now looked at him differently. Some with guilt, some with curiosity, and some with something like shame. Not for what they had done, but for what they hadn't. A man across the aisle, mid-50s, gray temples, tailored blazer, cleared his throat awkwardly. I saw what happened earlier, he said, voice low. Malik turned his head slowly, offering nothing but a neutral gaze. It was wrong, man, the man continued. All of it. And I didn't say anything. I just sat there. Malik studied him for a moment, then asked quietly, "Why didn't you?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "I guess. I thought it wasn't my place. I didn't think it would go that far." Malik's response came without venom. "It never starts far. It starts quietly." The man nodded, ashamed. "I'll remember that." Malik turned away again, not out of dismissal, but to let the moment stand on its own. No lecture, no demand. Just a truth left hanging in the air. The kind that doesn't fade, only sinks deeper. Further back, passengers began replaying what they'd witnessed, and more importantly, what they hadn't done. One woman whispered to her travel partner, "She hit his hand. That wasn't just policy. That was personal." Her partner nodded. "We should have said something." But we didn't. At that moment, Malik's phone vibrated softly in his lap. A message from his father. "She apologized in public, but I doubt she understands why." He typed back, "She doesn't. Not yet." Another reply followed. "She will. Before this flight ends, she will." In the cockpit, Captain Jensen checked the time. The flight had been delayed over 20 minutes now. Not due to weather, not due to maintenance, but due to a moral reckoning. And not a single passenger had left their seat. He radioed the ground crew, confirmed readiness, and prepared for pushback. But he knew, no matter how smooth this flight would be in the air, the turbulence had already happened on the ground. As the plane finally began to taxi, Malik leaned back into his seat. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He was something else entirely. Still, not the kind of stillness that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from awareness. From knowing that every silence in the cabin had just spoken louder than 100 arguments ever could. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft ding, and the cabin settled into its usual rhythm. Drinks clinking, laptops opening, murmurs of small talk rising like background static. But something beneath the surface had shifted. The flight was aloft now, but the truth hadn't stayed grounded. It had taken flight with them. In row 12, a teenage girl with earbuds and chipped nail polish whispered to her brother, "That's him, the one she kicked out." Her brother looked up, followed her gaze to the boy in 2A, Malik Reed, silent still. Reading a book like that didn't just become the center of the sky's quiet storm, but the internet was not quiet. In economy, a passenger named Tom had uploaded a shaky video, 30 seconds of chaos captured on a smartphone. Sandra Beckett, towering over Malik, raising her voice, snatching his phone, the audible slap when she struck on his hand, the walk of shame to the back. The recording ended with the sound of his backpack zipper and an older man muttering, "That's messed up." The clip went live at 3:12 p.m. By 3:19, it had 8,400 views. By 3:30, 87,000. By 3:45, a trending hashtag appeared. #Seat2A. Malik didn't check his phone. He didn't have to. He could feel it building, like pressure behind the cabin walls. And then it came, a soft buzz. Text from his father. "The footage is out. News outlets are calling. You've made your point. Sit back. I'll handle the rest." Malik stared at the message for a moment before typing, "She's gone. But I'm not sure she understands why." A pause, then the reply, "She will, not because we punished her, but because the world is watching now." In the galley, Sandra Beckett leaned against the wall, hands gripping the edge of the metal tray counter. Her coffee sat untouched. The illusion of control, the thing she wore like a tailored uniform, was unraveling thread by thread. Lana Rivers walked past her silently. No eye contact, no rescue. Sandra's mind raced. She had seen incidents before. People lose it, break rules. But this was different. It wasn't just what she did. It was who she did it to. and the silence from her colleagues. That was the loudest indictment. Then the call came, through the intercom phone, clipped and cold. "Miss Beckett, prepare to disembark. You'll be removed from duty when we return to the gate." She nearly dropped the phone. "You're removing me?" "This comes from the top," the captain replied flatly. "The airline owner himself. You'll step off. Someone else will complete the flight." Her throat tightened. "What am I supposed to tell the passengers?" "You don't have to tell them anything," the voice said. "They already saw enough." Meanwhile, passengers throughout the cabin were receiving push notifications. News apps, tweets, videos. Teen removed from first class. Turns out he's the airline CEO's son. Hashar seat 2A is trending. Privilege denied, then reclaimed, without a word. And still Malik didn't say anything, but silence now felt louder than ever. In seat 3D, a woman in a tailored white blazer leaned slightly across the aisle toward Malik. Her voice was gentle. "Can I say something?" He turned. "You handled that better than most adults I've ever seen," she said, pausing. "I didn't say anything when it happened. I saw it all, her tone, your face, and I just sat there. I told myself it wasn't my place, but it was." Malik looked at her, not with blame, but with quiet recognition. He said softly, "Silence protects the one who's loudest." She nodded. "I won't be silent again." Back in the economy, a middle-aged woman with curly hair pulled out her phone and stared at the video again. This time, she wasn't watching Sandra. She was watching herself, seated 2 rows behind, eyes averted, frozen, pretending not to hear the slap. She whispered to no one, "I saw it, I just didn't know what to do." The person beside her replied, "Now we do." In the cockpit, Captain Jensen received another executive message. "Incident under internal review. All crew required to retake anti-bias certification. Official press release pending." He sighed. He'd flown war zones, evacuations, once even a diplomatic flight, but never had he flown a route where silence had reshaped the entire cabin. In 2A, Malik finally opened his phone, not to watch the footage, but to read the messages pouring in from strangers. "Thank you for showing grace." That walk to the back, that was the loudest part. "You didn't raise your voice, but now we're all listening." He scrolled slowly, then paused. A message from a classmate he hadn't spoken to in months. "They never would have believed me, but they're believing you." Malik turned the screen off. He rested his head lightly against the window, watching clouds slide beneath him like stories half-written. He wasn't proud. He wasn't angry. He was aware of what had happened, of what still happens, of what might finally begin to shift. The sky outside began to pale. No longer the blinding white of afternoon altitude, but a softer hue, as if dawn were rising early. Just for this flight. Inside the cabin, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling descent. But the air wasn't filled with the usual hum of relaxation or impatience. It carried something else entirely: awareness. Passengers who once scrolled past each other now sat straighter, quieter. Some stared at the window, others glanced towards seat 2A, where Malik Reed sat unmoving, not sleeping, not reading, just absorbing. No earbuds, no crossed arms, just a boy whose silence had split the air at 30,000 feet. The captain's voice broke through the intercom, steady and smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seat belts and ensure tray tables are in their upright position. Thank you." The usual murmurs didn't follow. There was no collective groan about delays, no polite laughter, just stillness. In row 4, a mother leaned toward her daughter and whispered, "You see that young man up there?" The girl, no older than 10, nodded. "He stood up today without yelling. That's called dignity." Back near the galley, Lana Rivers smoothed her uniform collar with mechanical grace, but her thoughts weren't on landing protocols. They were on the lookout in Sandra Beckett's eyes when she stepped off the plane. Not rage, not even regret, just the stunned hollowness of someone who had finally seen herself, not in a mirror, but in the reflection of consequences. Lana had worked nearly 70 flights that year, but none like this, not because of turbulence, but because, for once, truth had flown with them. When the wheels touched the ground with a soft jolt, the usual applause never came. No forced cheers, no mindless claps, only a slow exhale across the cabin, like everyone had been holding their breath for hours. Malik checked his phone. Message from his father. Media's waiting at the gate. No cameras. Just a few questions. You don't have to speak. He typed back, I will. But not for me. I want to speak for everyone who's ever been told to move quietly to the back. I just happened to have a seat they couldn't ignore. As the plane rolled to a stop, passengers didn't jump to their feet. Instead, they waited. A woman in business attire leaned into the aisle and whispered, "Thank you." A man across from Malik met his gaze and simply nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I should have done more." But Malik didn't need their apologies. He wasn't here for their guilt. He was here for something bigger. He remained seated until every last passenger had exited, watching, not to shame them, but to remind them presence has power. When the final person stepped off, Lana Rivers remained at the front of the cabin, hands clasped. She didn't speak until he passed. You didn't say much, she murmured, but I saw everything. That matters. Malik paused, looked at her. You didn't have to fix it, he said. You just had to see it. She nodded, and then he walked off into a jet bridge lined not with cameras, but with faces ready to listen. Outside the gate, a man in a black overcoat approached. Mark Sullivan, head of PR, flanked by two senior executives. He extended a hand. There's no excuse for what happened, he said carefully. Sandra Beckett has been removed. A full review is underway. Our official apology goes out tonight. Malik didn't shake his hand. He didn't have to. Instead, he said, this was never about one person. It's about a culture that lets people like her assume someone like me doesn't belong. He let the silence linger. I want training, not mandatory videos. I want real conversations. I want every uniform to understand what power looks like when it's misused and what it feels like to have to prove you belong in a seat you paid for. Mark swallowed. We hear you. Then prove it, Malik said, to the people still sitting in the back. And with that, he left. No press conference, no applause, just the footsteps of a young man who had refused to disappear quietly. Key takeaways: implied bias hurts as loudly as action. Sandra didn't need to shout to harm. A look, a tone, a doubt, all carry weight when they come from power. Silence isn't neutral. The passengers who stayed quiet during the humiliation became part of the problem. Only when truth forced itself forward did they reflect. Silence often protects injustice more than conflict ever could. Dignity is power. Malik never raised his voice. He didn't demand revenge. He simply stood his ground, and in doing so, changed the atmosphere of the entire plane. Representation shifts the lens. The story went viral because the world finally saw what too many had experienced quietly every day. It wasn't just Malik's power that mattered. It was his presence and his refusal to shrink. Change begins when we stop pretending not to see. Lana, the quiet flight attendant, didn't protest at the moment, but she chose to acknowledge the truth later. That shift from witness to aware is where reform begins.